A new development bank set up by the BRICS group of emerging economies plans to lend $1.5 billion to South Africa for infrastructure projects over the next 18 months. That's more than 20 billion rand. The BRICS countries, which include Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, celebrated the launch of the African Regional Centre of the bank in Johannesburg yesterday. The bank, which lends funds to its member countries exclusively for now, aims to contribute to the acceleration of infrastructure investments in energy, transport, water, and other productive sectors. Well, South Africa has already requested a grant and been granted a 2.4 billion rand loan from the bank for Eskom's renewable energy projects. However, that loan has since been temporarily halted because Eskom would have had to use it, all the money, for exclusively green projects according to the terms. Well, Professor Patrick Bond from the Wits University, he's a professor in political economy, actually joins me now for more on the bank and the regional office. Professor, thanks very much indeed for talking to us.
It's nice to be here with you, Devin. Thanks.
Well, established in 2015, it's already dished out funds for at least 7 projects. Do you see this as a strong alternative to the traditional Western lenders? The BRICS countries certainly thinks it is.
Well, that's the rhetoric, but behind the scenes, it's terribly important to look for the devils in the details, such as last September, a memo of agreement with the World Bank signed by Jim Yong Kim, World Bank president, and KV Kamath, the BRICS NDB president, which calls for joint project financing, research, and even sharing of staff. If you look at the people who've come from the bank, including our new director, our Treasury Secretary, Director General, who is from the World Bank in the period 2007 to 2010 as South Africa's representative, I don't see too much difference. The bank vice president from South Africa, Leslie Masdorp, had worked at Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, Barclays, was in charge of privatization of South African assets for a little while. These are people who've circulated in the top ranks of world finance. Will they set up something completely different? I don't think so.
Yeah. There were some pluses, though, that I heard yesterday, and let's just speak about one of them. Member countries are emerging. Let's talk about the emerging countries traditionally applying for loans through these Western lenders, and they met with dollar-denominated debt and loans. The NDB yesterday saying that they are pursuing debt or loans in local currency. That has to be a plus for emerging countries, shouldn't it?
Oh, it sure is. And any time we're celebrating getting some big dollar-denominated loan, we should think twice. We have a foreign debt of $143 billion at the Reserve Bank's last count. That's a world historic high for this country. South Africa defaulted in 1985 when the debt was only it was about $13 billion of debt in default. It was about 41% of GDP as a total foreign debt. Today we're about 48%. So we are in a dangerous territory in which a lot of commentators are asking, should we go to the IMF for a bailout? There I might add that the contingent reserve arrangement of the BRICS is meant to be an alternative to the IMF. But once you get 30% of your quota, which is for us would be $3 billion, you have to go to the IMF to get a structural adjustment loan. But your basic point is absolutely right. This country's stock market is the most bubbly in world history, in fact, using the Warren Buffett index of the value of fictitious assets in the JSE to the size of the GDP. Nowhere, maybe Switzerland, Singapore came a little bit close, but there's huge amounts of liquidity, and tapping that through making sensible loans, perhaps to parastatals that are finding themselves in the kind of trouble Transnet and Eskom are, might be one way to address this question of local financing, such as the Eskom loan from the BRICS NDB should have been for our local steel and the local cables, local labor, to build a transmission line extension to renewable energy projects. That would have been good. As you point out, unfortunately, it's fictional too. Eskom, under the awful leadership of both Molefe and Coco, had just said no to renewable energy, preferring to set the stage perhaps for a BRICS-related nuclear loan that everyone's rather worried about.
How does that development affect our future relationship financially with this bank? I mean, you have a loan, 2.4 billion rand granted to Eskom. It's now found out that they cannot use that money for outside renewable projects. Does that do anything to our future relationship with the bank as South Africa?
Oh, I would say so. Every one of these big infrastructure projects now needs to be carefully examined because ESCOM has huge guarantees, 350 billion rand from the taxpayers. I think finally people are realizing if ESCOM goes, as Brian Molefe arranged, and gets $5 billion in loans from the Chinese, that may be worth really inquiring into. The same for Transnet. Its $5 billion loans, also arranged by Molefe when he was head of Transnet, were for locomotives from the Chinese, and huge scandals have now erupted around overcharging and the sort of character of these. And it's really a dubious set of mega projects by these parastatals that the top two in our national development plan are to export 18 billion tons of coal from Lephalale on the Botswana border through Limpopo, Mpumalanga, KZN, through Richards Bay. 18 billion tons of coal, so destructive. The second biggest is the Durban dig-out port. They've just postponed that 16 years. In other words, let's take the advantage of a BRICS New Development Bank debate to say, are these projects really in the interest of the society, the environment? The World Bank didn't do that, by the way, when they made a $3.75 billion loan to ESCOM for Medupi. That was A, corrupt, Hitachi Chancellor House, and B, terribly destructive to the local environment, workers protesting constantly, but also to global change. It's the climate change. It's the fourth biggest coal-fired power plant in the world. Those are the questions civil society is trying to ask of the BRICS NDP. They're finding it even a more opaque institution than the World Bank, and that's one of the tragedies, that this could be an opportunity to say we need different finance. It doesn't look like we're getting it.
Okay, but I'm going to have to leave it there because of time. Professor Patrick Bond from Wits University, thanks very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you.